Rosalind Jukic. Welcome back to my channel. I am a second generation homeschool mom living in Croatia. And today I'm going to be bringing you in on a little experiment that I'm doing with my children. Now, this is something new that we just started today. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but I thought, you know what, it would be fun to bring you in with me. And then in a couple of weeks, I can give an update to let you know how it's working for us. Now, what I am doing is I'm helping my children to develop executive function. This is something that both of my children struggle with. I have a child in the 3rd grade and a child in the 5th grade, and I feel like I am giving them instructions step by step for everything that they do, for every subject, for every lesson that they're doing in that subject. And I really feel like it's important at this stage that I build a greater sense of independence for them, a greater understanding of how much time it is taking to do every subject. The struggle that we have every day is that they like to play with the cat. They get so distracted that as they're walking through the room from their bedroom to get a pencil or eraser or something to the kitchen table, they can get distracted by a glass of water, by a toy, by the cat, by something they see on the floor. It is non-stop, me constantly having to bring them back in to what we are doing. And I feel like they're old enough that I shouldn't have to be able to do this. I shouldn't have to constantly be bringing them back into what we're doing. And a big part of that is executive function. I do have 2 children who are neurodivergent. I've talked very openly about the fact that they both have a developmental language disorder diagnosis, or MERLD, which stands for Mixed Expressive Receptive Language Disorder. I do have one child that has some more complex issues that we have not chosen to talk about openly and publicly at this time. That may come at a later time, but for the time being, we have just only chosen to speak publicly about their language disorder. Now, I got this idea from a podcast that I follow by Dr. Nicole Berkins, and she had a guest on her show named Sarah Ward, and she has a lot of experience in diagnostic evaluations and treatment of executive function. And one of the things that she talked about on this podcast was so practical and so easy to do that I decided to just start it right away. So I'm going to bring you in. I'm going to show you what it is that we're doing. I'm going to talk about how we are doing this, how it factors into our homeschool, and some of the rewards that I want to give them for staying on focus. So here we go. What we are doing actually here is we are in the middle of our first subject. Our first subject started at 8:35. I'm giving my children 40 minutes to get done. Now that is an ample amount of time. And once they are done with their subject, if they get done early, they can either take a break and move on to the next subject. They can move on to the next subject without a break, or they can actually move on, take a break to the end of their time, depending on how early they want to be done with school. Now, they have 2, this is for their independent subjects. So they have 2 independent subjects. They have math and then they have language. The language includes language arts, spelling, and then they also have an elective subject that comes up a couple times a week. And so those subjects, the math is one of these 40-minute blocks, and then the other, language arts plus spelling plus the elective, goes into the next 40-minute block. Then we move into our joint subjects, which are history and science. With our history, we pull in art once a week, and we pull in music once a week. It's like a music appreciation. And those are things that are done rather quickly. They actually get put into that history 40-minute block. After history and science come reading and instruments, practicing instruments, each of those also having its own 40-minute block. So we end up having about 8 40-minute blocks a day, which works out to be about 5.5 hours of school. Now, we don't need all of that time. That is what I am allowing, to give us ample room so that we can take good breaks and things like that.
But we have those time blocks set aside. Now, I want to show you why this is important. Back at our clock. Now, I put the piece of paper starting at the time that we actually started the subject. And this is the amount of time it should take for them to be done. Once the big hand reaches this edge of the paper, they are done. Whatever's left over becomes their homework. It's a motivation for them to stay on task, but it's also a visual so that they can see how much time is actually taking them to do each subject. Now, when we're done with this subject, then the paper shifts. We shift it over to where the next subject begins, and then once again they have a visual reminder of how much time they are taking to do the new subject. And there is a reward if we get done on time. I usually allow for us to be done between 2 and 2:30, and that is allowing for each 40-minute block plus a little bit of wiggle room in case something takes longer. We all know that it happens in homeschool, right? We land on something super interesting and we sort of camp out there for a while, or something comes up, an important telephone call or whatever. So I give a little bit of wiggle room. So I give about a half an hour to hour of wiggle room. We should usually be done by about 1:30, but sometimes things come up, and so I've given myself about an hour wiggle room for things to happen in between. And if we're done before 2:30, we usually have our biggest meal between 2:30 and 3. We are in Europe, and so we eat what we call lunch, which would be like an American dinner, between 2:30 and 3. And if the kids are done, anytime that they're done before lunch, so the time between the end of school and lunchtime, if they get done early, they get extra video game time. That is like the biggest reward that I could give them. That is going to be the biggest motivation for them to get done early. So they have a choice. They can take breaks or they can choose not to take breaks. Now, when we're moving from the independent subject to the joint subject, what one child decides will determine what happens with the other child. That is true. This is going to give them the opportunity to work it out amongst themselves, what they're going to decide to do. One may decide to take a break while the other decides he wants to move on. The one decision will affect the other. But then going from the independent subjects back to going from the joint subjects back to the independent subjects, they get to choose for themselves. And then the outcome, they will bear the results of that. I really feel like this is going to be great. Like I said, this isn't my idea. This is an idea that I found on Dr. Nicole Birkin's podcast. So I will check in with you in a couple weeks to let you know how it's doing. So far today, it's been great. So far, since we began using this as a visual illustration for how much time it takes to do a subject, how much time it takes if they do their subject and get distracted, and plus the reward of if you stay on task, if you get done in the allotted amount of time or before, then there might be a reward at the end of the school day. So far, that has been working wonderfully. So far today, I have not had to ride their tails to stay on task, to get their work done, to pay attention. So far, it has worked like magic. So I'll check back in a couple of weeks to let you know. Now, in this podcast, I will go ahead and link that podcast in the description box below so you can go listen to it yourself. There was another suggestion in the podcast for helping to build executive function, and we're going to be trying that at a later time. And I will talk about that when we get to that part. But I wanted to start with this because it was the easiest thing that I could see that we could begin working with right away. And then the other suggestion in that podcast, we will be also employing that when this one kind of gets under our belt a little bit better. So like I said, I will link that podcast in the description box below so you can go listen yourself. I do highly recommend Dr. Nicole Birkin's podcast. I really feel that she is a wonderful advocate for alternative forms of education. And she has a wonderful outlook on, getting your child diagnosed and following all of that. I just feel like she doesn't always just go along with the beating drums, that she really does march to the beat of her own drum. And I feel like her outlook and her perspective on all of that is very refreshing. I have really, really enjoyed listening to her podcast. I have her book that I'm starting to work through now. And so far, I have been really super impressed with what I've heard and read from her. So I highly recommend her podcast for those of you who have children that maybe, have some of those maybe, just struggles with, potential ADHD or like an autism spectrum disorder or, some other neurodivergence. I really recommend that you check out her materials because she is fabulous and really advocates for doing as much as you can as a parent at home. She is a good homeschool advocate and advocate for other forms of alternative education. And I just feel like, I have been refreshed listening to and reading her materials. So you can check her out also in the description box below, and I will see you in the next video. Bye. Just a quick update. This is day one again of working with this clock as a sort of way to practice executive function. It is currently 10:52, and we just finished with history and science. We are on our last 2 blocks of 40-minute blocks that we do for our subjects. Now, we are not going to need both of those 40-minute blocks. I know we won't. But just to give an idea, this ordinarily, by the time we got to reading and instruments, which is our last 2 blocks, that's what we've just started as our reading, ordinarily, it would already be about 12:30, sometimes even 1:30. It was not odd for it to be about 1:30. That means that we are actually 2.5 hours ahead of where we normally are. That's a maximum. So I would say between 1.5 to 2.5 hours ahead of where we ordinarily are on a regular school day. This is working so well. My kids have not been asking to take breaks between every single subject, which is not necessary because we don't really, each subject doesn't take, long enough that we actually need to have a break between each one. They are actually happy to forego their break and move on. They are way more concentrated. They're retaining a lot more because they're just really, really focused. And so this is working well for day one. I am really looking forward to seeing how this improves over the next couple of weeks. So I will check in with you in a couple of weeks, but this is where we're at on day one. I'm loving it so far. So I just want to point out that being ahead does not always necessarily mean that, if we're done by say 12:30, that school has to be over. One of the benefits of doing this is going to be that we can actually take extra time and go on deep dives with things. So it's not necessarily bad that school goes to like say 1:30 or 2:30. Especially if we get really, really into a subject and we're just digging into it and we're exploring. That is the benefit of, the actual lessons themselves being shorter because it gives us the creativity, that room for creativity, that room to go on deep dives and things like that. So I just want to point that out, that just because we're done by 12:30 does not necessarily mean that, we put our books away and walk away. We can actually say, hey, we're done at 12:30. You want to watch this movie? Let's watch this documentary. Let's do a cooking project. Let's do an art project, something that goes along with what we're learning. It gives us the option to do that without the kids feeling like they've already been drunk through a knothole because they've been in school for 6 hours. So that is the benefit to this. I feel like, we've not been able to do as much of that as I wanted to do because I've just had to ride their tails all day long. Quit picking up the cat. Quit, put your toy down. Come back to the table. we're not talking about your video games right now. You know, these types of things. There's just a constant distraction after distraction after distraction. And this so far has helped to really keep their focus, because there is a reward at the end of the day, which even by doing the deep dives or the cooking projects or, you know, whatever, we can still get to that reward. We can still say, you know what, it's 2:30, let's be done. You get some extra video game time because, you know, you were extra concentrated today. You know, that reward can still be there. And so I'm really excited. That's been a huge motivation for my kids today. So I'm hoping that it's just going to continue to be that way over the next couple of weeks.